Today's episode is sponsored by Rev, the productivity powerhouse for content creators, journalists, market researchers, and more. Capture audio from anywhere, get AI-powered summaries and quotes, and leave security worries behind with Rev. Whether you're on the go or in the office, Rev's got you covered. Discover more at rev.com. Hi, I'm Kendall Kelton, and I'm your host today on The Rough Draft. Featuring honest conversations with folks from across the creative industry, The Rough Draft explores the creative process, tools, and resources used by some of the best in the business. From journalists to content creators and business leaders, we shed light on what it looks like to break into the industry, make mistakes, collaborate with others, and the essential tools that help us all along the way. This week, I'm super excited to be talking with Casey Miner, an editor at Throughline, a podcast from NPR that explains the history behind current events. Now, Casey has spent most of her career editing podcasts for Planet Money, Wondery, and Reveal, to name a few. And she has taught narrative story structure at the University of California, Berkeley, and is co-founder of the Editors Collective, a group of narrative audio editors working to diversify the field and build networks and career paths for new editors. And on today's episode, Casey shares her journey from public radio to audio journalism and the lessons she's learned all along the way. Casey, thank you so much for joining.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be talking with you for multiple reasons. But I think, your career as an editor, but then also your career within audio journalism is so fascinating considering the boom we're experiencing with podcasts. We're on a podcast right now. But before we dive into a little bit of that, I actually just want to start with your roots and where you began, I think, in San Francisco and public radio.
Yeah. So I started my audio career at KALW Public Radio in San Francisco. Shout out to KALW.
What drew you to even starting there?
When I graduated from college, I had started writing for the Alt Weekly in the city where I was. And that was also an experience where I started freelancing for them at a moment when they didn't have a lot of staff. And so I was given free rein in a way that I don't think is super common necessarily. And then at a certain point, I thought I've never really had any formal journalism training. So I applied to do the research fellowship at Mother Jones Magazine, which is based in San Francisco. And I came out here to do that and decided maybe I'll go to grad school for journalism at Berkeley because it's right here. And one of the things I liked about the Berkeley program was that it was very holistic. You had to focus on a lot of different skill sets. And I took the radio class kind of for fun. And the first time I got a recorder and went and interviewed somebody, I was like, oh, you get to hear their voice and their mannerisms and they laugh and there's all this cool sound. And you can, I loved the texture and it was everything just sprung to life. And so when I was looking for internships in between my 2 years of school, one of the ones I applied to was this internship at KALW, which was in the Bay. And so then when I graduated and they had this role as a temporary, it started out transportation reporter so that I could go and work at this place. And then I think I just really haven't looked back.
And it's exploded in the last several years. You could see that kind of progression upwards around 2015, 2016, which is right around the time that you actually started and created your own podcast, right?
Yes. So I launched my own podcast in 2015. And yeah, as you say, this was right around, I got very fortunate in this way that, again, I didn't know at the time, right? The time when I was at KALW was right around the time that Serial came out and that podcast really started booming. And all of a sudden, everybody...
Oh, that one in particular changed it for me. I was like, oh, I love this. I'm
absolutely. And I think, we all really loved it. And then it was cool because all of a sudden... my skill sets and the skill sets of my peers, the people I was working with, were all really in demand. It was how to edit audio, how to record, how to interview people, how to get high quality sound, how to host. And so there was a lot of work, and I had an idea for a show that I wanted to do on my own. And so I launched this podcast called The Specialist, where I profiled people who did interesting or unusual work. I would go and spend a day with, the mock attacker in a women's self-defense class, or a home stager in the Bay Area where the real estate market is totally crazy. And the zoo chefs at the Oakland Zoo was another one that I liked.
I actually listened to the poll.
Oh, you did? Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
I did. I listened to it. I was like, well, this feels timely. And I thought it was so interesting. You don't know what some of these folks, are doing just to set up, a voting location at a school, like what it takes.
What's required. Yeah. And I think that's what I was curious about that, right? Like who is doing the work that makes everything around us go, I think is another way to think about it, because there's so many people doing work that you really don't think about or see.
You had transitioned into more of an editor role. And so I'd like to just hear a bit about that decision, and would love to just get your take on why editing.
Yeah, absolutely. I love to talk about why editing. I think more people should be editors. And so, let me say what I mean first, because I think sometimes there's a little bit of confusion. So the kind of editing I'm talking about is not audio editing, moving around chunks of sound in Pro Tools or, Audacity or something like that, although I have done that as well. I'm talking about narrative story editing. So working with a producer to refine an idea, shape a story arc, plan interviews, do the interviews, figure out what's the best part, weave it all together with other kinds of sound, and eventually move it towards the finished product that you hear. Part of the reason I like it is because it is really collaborative and it's fun to help somebody create their vision. And I think as a producer, especially when you've done hours of recordings, it's so easy to get lost in what I think Jad Abumrad of Radiolab famously called the German forest. It's like you're in this thick, dark woods and you cannot see anything at all, and you feel like you're never going to get out. And the editor I think is a person who comes with a lamp. The editor comes and helps you along the path. The editor helps you say like, hey, we're going to bushwhack through this together. And it's a cool role because you do have a different perspective on the story. You're hearing about it, you're talking about it with the producer, but you're not in it. So sometimes you can see things that maybe they're not able to see. Hey, what if we started here? Tell me more about this character. Talk to me about this experience of recording. And I'm going to write down what you're saying as you say it, because I hear a lot of energy and excitement and details in what you're saying that aren't coming across in your script right now. And I want to help you get that out there. And then from a practical standpoint, it's a little more predictable than a reporter job. Anybody who's been a reporter knows that like when news happens, that's when you have to go. That's when you have to go be there. And I have done that. And I think, as I have advanced in my career, I have 2 young kids now. I have valued the kind of more regular schedule that comes with editing as well. We're not seen enough as editors. We're not seen enough. So I would like us to be seen more.
Well, I thought that was a beautiful articulation of what an editor is. And I actually want to take a little bit closer look at that process and what makes storytelling, especially with audio and narrative building, so compelling in our next episode. Well, that's it for today's episode of The Rough Draft. Be sure to rate and subscribe in order to stay up to date with the latest episodes, and visit rev.com/podcast for even more content. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of The Rough Draft.